In this video we'll look at processing business data. Now the material in this video is very straightforward, but nonetheless it's important to go through it and recognize the various stages and ensure that we understand the stages that must be undertaken in order to produce good information at the end of the process. So first of all, organizations accumulate data on a daily basis and they collect the data through manual and electronic formats. So organizations are constantly coming across new data. Every day there will be sales, there will be raw material requisitions, there will be information coming from the shop floor in production, information coming from the marketing section and from the personnel section or the HR section. There will be information flowing around the system all the time, and it's a question of capturing that information or capturing that data, I should say, and turning it into information. So there's a lot of data coming into the system, coming into the company in terms of sales orders, productivity and so on. That data needs to be converted into information that will be useful for management in making decisions. And essentially we can identify these as four steps, four features of processing data. And these are very, very straightforward, but nonetheless, as I said, we need to go through them. The first one is there has to be data to be collected. There has to be data, otherwise the process cannot exist. So the company must collate the data, must collect the data and have it available ready for processing. So it must be made available for processing. And of course the data must be accurate. If it's not accurate, then any subsequent analysis converting the data into information will lead to faulty information, which will lead to bad decision making. So data must be accurate. So it's important then to convert data into information, because it's the information that's going to be used. The information tells the managers what the data is saying, what's the meaning of the data. So it's important to use appropriate formats to classify and summarize the data. It's important for the managers to use perhaps statistical packages or computer packages to do perhaps sometimes quite sophisticated analysis of data in the process of converting the data into information. So it's necessary to look at the data to try to determine what do the managers need from the data, what sort of information do they need, and see if that can be extracted. For example, the use of reports for producing turnover figures. Now, the information in this case may be required to, let's say, send invoices. So a company may know what its sales are, what its turnover is for the last month or the last week, and it needs to work out what's the trend. And the trend will determine how much production will be needed and how much raw materials should be in stock and what sort of pressures the organization will be under at certain times of the year. But it'll also tell the marketing section, it'll tell the finance section about the number of invoices that will be generated in particular time periods. And reports can be then produced for the managers to explain to them what the trends are, explain to the managers why there is a peak or why demand has fallen off in a certain period. What is the likely implications of this for the business in terms of revenue, profitability in that particular time period, and what are the implications? So it's necessary to convert data into information. The information is what the managers use to make decisions, and the information is based on data. Data is just simply facts and figures. Information is what it's used for. It's worth noting here, of course, that the data doesn't have to be just facts and figures. The data could be situations. It could be the data is that certain machinery need maintenance at certain times of the year. That's a piece of data, and that should be factored into some sort of production schedule. The production schedule contains the information about the machines, the information about productivity, the information about the layout of the plant, and any changes that have taken place. Next, it's to update the information. We update the data, I should say, sorry. It's necessary to update the data. The company has a stock of data which is historic, it's come from the past, but new data is being generated every day. So it's necessary to update the amount of data, integrate the new material, the new information that will be, that's now contained in the data, integrate it into the database so that the new information is more up to date as well. So it's a constant adding to exercise. The new data is added to the existing data, which will generate new information. So this process ensures that all the records are up to date and that new information is fed through the system. So decision making is based on contemporary, the contemporary picture. What is happening now? Of course, the information and the data must be accurate, otherwise it'll lead to faulty decision making. So for example, turnover for the month. Well, the information must be accurate, as this will affect financial recording. So if the turnover for the month is a projection, that's a set of data. That's what's been suggested by the management. Then there's the actual data, the amount that's actually produced, the amount of turnover that's produced in the month. So we have two sets of data, the projected one and the actual. Now some sort of analysis can be conducted as to variance. Why are they different? And that analysis generates information which will enable the management to make better forecasts in the future. Lastly, it's important that information that's derived from the data should be disseminated to the appropriate people. The whole exercise of analyzing the data produces reports and disseminates the information to the correct authorities. So the process produces reports. The data, when it's analyzed, becomes information. The information is contained in reports, and then the appropriate managers receive copies of the reports. So for example, on turnover again, on sales, the marketing department may receive a copy of the report. The senior management may receive a copy of the report, so that they're able to work on better ways of improving their performance. It's also the case, of course, that there could be reports on payroll that require regular attention. It doesn't have to be on sales. It can be in any part of the business. It could be on production. It could be on productivity. It can be on stores and stocks in the stores, or it could be on office layout. We take the existing office layout, that's the data, and then we analyze it, turn it into information to see if the design could be improved. The example we've got on the screen is reports concerning payroll that require attention. Of course, once the data is stored, let's say on a computer, then it can be interrogated at almost any time. Managers may pose particular questions, and the data is there to try and enable them to get answers to those questions, which will improve their performance. But of course, only the appropriate managers should be able to access the data. And also, the data must be secure. It can't be contaminated or altered. Perhaps even by accident, by people accidentally changing the data and not keeping a copy of the original. And reports, of course, regarding forecasting. Having got the data, it's tempting not to make forecasts, to try and extrapolate the data to make forecasts as to what's likely to happen in the future. So, we recognize that we must have data collection. Now, the data that's collected can come from a whole variety of sources. It could be, for example, external to the business. It could be that data is collected looking at the wider environment, in this case a pestle analysis, a politics, economic, social, technological, legal environment. So it's looking at the wider picture. But the wider picture is relevant for businesses. Businesses do not exist in vacuums. They exist in communities. They exist in society. And what's happening nationally, government policy, does affect business. So there are situations where the managers must take into account what's happening outside of the business. Then, of course, most obviously, there are the internal parts of the business, the information and the data, well, the data and then subsequently the information that's been collected internally regarding, as I said earlier, productivity, sales, costs, whatever it is. So there is data within the business. There's also data regarding competitors, data regarding their pricing and which markets they're operating in, what their strategy appears to be. That's data that needs to be analysed. It may need to be analysed by the marketing section and by senior management, but it is data that needs analysis. And there should be some sort of critical review of the products and services that the business makes to make sure that they are contemporary, that they meet customer expectations and customer requirements. And that there's also a program of development, product development, running within the business that will secure the business into the future. And it should look at customers. Customers are important. What are customers' expectations? What are the customers saying? There should be some reports based on customer expectations and customer surveys that will also constitute data that needs analysis and turning into information so that the business can act upon what the customers are saying. And then, of course, there's the whole processing part. Having collected a lot of data, it's necessary to process it. And processing it may not necessarily mean statistical packages and computers and so on. It depends on what the data is. It may be analysed by a group of managers getting together and trying to work out what the data means. That may be the most appropriate way of doing the processing. But the processing should generate an output. That's important. If there's no output, if there's no understanding as a consequence of the processing, then the exercise fails. It fails at that point. If there's no output, it still remains data. It's not information, and hence is not useful to the business. But the output needs interpretation. It needs to be looked at by managers, and it needs to be interpreted in the context of what their policy is. What are they attempting to do? What does the output say? What's the output suggesting? And how does it fit with the objectives of the business? But once an interpretation has been made, it should lead to action. It should lead to some changes or some updating. The information is making recommendations, in a sense. It's telling the managers this is what is happening. The data is suggesting the following, and the management can then take action. They can then make changes. So there's some action there. And also, it must be disseminated. It must go to the right managers. If it goes to the wrong managers, it will not be acted upon. If it goes to the wrong managers, it may lie dormant. So it must go to the right managers. It must be relevant, and it must be acted upon. The dissemination, depending on the nature of the information, it may go to the public. It's unlikely, but it could do. Having collected data and then analysed the data, worked out the trends, if the trends show the business in a very positive light and show that the business is meeting customer expectations, that may be put out into the public domain, because it is something positive about the business and may be used in marketing campaigns. So positive information may be put out to the public. The shareholders, the stockholders, they will want to know how the business is doing. So information will be passed to them. And the government, of course, will want to know how the business is doing. The government is involved in the economy. The government needs to know what employment will be in particular areas and what are the requirements of the business in terms of skills and education and employability and so on. The government will also want to know if the business is paying tax, and if the business will continue paying tax, because the government needs revenue. So there are many parts to the data collection process. The type of data, the type of processing, the interpretation, the action that's going to be taken as a consequence of the information that's discovered from processing the data, and then disseminating the outcomes to relevant parties, to the public, to the employees, to the trade union, to the managers, to the government. So there are various parts involved in the process of information. Well, that's all we're going to do in this session, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.